Kimberly Voll, again, was an honors graduate from our cognitive science program and a PhD from the computer science department here. She was at UBC, and she's now a professor of game design, software engineering, and experiences at the Center for Digital Media. And many of us know her through her incredible organizational issues of literally starting IamAgamer.ca and organizing the Global Game Jam that a lot of us have been involved in, and other kind of local and national video game development communities. So,
thank you, Steve. So it's always fun to be starting off a series because I figure I can just set the bar really, really low, and then everything else is going to get a lot better after today. So bear with me while we establish that bar. So as Steve said, yeah, I wear a lot of hats, including a graduate of the cognitive science program here a long time ago, and a PhD in computer science, and then I was faculty of computer science at UBC for a lot of years, and most recently, I guess 2 years ago or so, I joined the Center for Digital Media, which Steve was just referring to, which is a graduate program in digital media. You do a Masters of Digital Media program there, and we do a lot of things pertaining to games and interactive experiences, and so I found a nice, comfortable home there given my background, my specialty in cognitive science, in interactive experiences, in artificial intelligence, and video games. So I am a lifelong gamer. I've been playing video games since the 70s. I have been making games since the 80s, and I have a few published games in the marketplace today. So I have this weird intersection, as is the COG's way, of a whole bunch of different things that I've shaped and poked and prodded into some of the things that I'm going to talk to you guys about today. I'm also an artist, so there's, since I stole all the rest of the art in this presentation, that one I made. So this slide is, you can do what you want with it, but there you go. Not all bad. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you guys through a little bit of a journey. So we're going to start talking about the origins of play, and then we're going to sort of walk through, and I'm going to drop you guys off with a little bit of taste of game design, and we're going to see how these things all interrelate. Now, I know there's quite the plethora of different backgrounds in this room, so I'm going to try to keep it at a fairly high level. I can certainly drill deeper with any of these things should you guys want to follow up with this, but that's kind of the plan. So let's start talking a little bit about words. So words are a system. Words are really the first extension of self. It makes no sense to have a system of words unless presumably you are trying to communicate in some capacity. So right from the get-go, right from when we're born, we're dropped off into a body, and we are presented with this largely unmapped control system. I mean, there's a few things that are just working automatically, but we're feeling it all out, and we're trying to master this system. So from birth straight through the rest of our lives, we will continue to try to master these systems. So these are the physical systems, these are the communication systems. It's all based around systems. And our brains are highly evolved to learn systems. I mean, it's what we do all the time. Whether we're consciously aware of it or not, we're always pattern matching, we're always adapting to the systems in our environments. And through mastering these systems, we're essentially learning the rules governing them. Coming out of this is this notion of play. So here's a few quotes on play that I like. Man is most nearly himself when he achieves the seriousness of a child at play. Perhaps one never seems so much at one's ease as when one has to play a part. Famous quote from Oscar Wilde. And Einstein, combinatory play seems to be the essential feature in productive thought. So all of these come at play from a slightly different perspective, but they all share one thing in common, namely that play as a system, as something that we do, cuts through everything. So we use play in its own system, but also from a more abstract level in mastering these systems. So it allows us to adapt. It allows us to feel things out, find our way in an otherwise fairly unforgiving world. You know, we figure things out the hard way pretty much right from birth. Plato saw play as the root to all learning. It was basically what was underlying any learning that we're going to do in a system. You know, if I want to learn that an edge is hard, I'm going to play around with it, I'm going to feel it, I'm going to interact with my environment in a very playful manner. And I'm going to come back to what I mean by that in a moment. And he saw that playfulness and seriousness were not themselves a bifurcation, two entities standing in opposition, but were in fact interrelated and not really to be fully teased apart. That one was feeding into the other and vice versa, and the line to be drawn between them was not really so much a line, but a blurring. And this is where the idea of the Socratic dialogue, et cetera, I mean, there's definitely play in there. You read those, and there's evidence that we're playing with words, we're playing with concepts, we're playing with interactions between one another. And from a more modern perspective, the word play itself arises in a variety of contexts. You know, you play around with things. I've already used that expression. If you do something really well, you say, well played. If you don't do something well enough, you're chastised, or if you don't play enough, rather, you're chastised as being all work and no play. Things that are added come into play. If you are adopting a particular role you play a part in, or if you have a particular part to play in a given activity you're playing a part in. If you're undecided, you will play it by ear. So the word play comes up in a bunch of different ways. You can, on one hand, dismiss it as well as just a word that is convenient in referring to these situations. But on the other hand, I think it has a more deeper sense in which it's referring to something more fundamental in how we interact with our environments. So play then, what is play? It's the free movement within the rigidity of a system. It's how we feel out that system. We are playing around because we are finding those boundaries and we are learning the implications of crossing those boundaries. We are essentially deriving rules from this. So play exists because of these systems, but also in spite of these systems. And it's at this interesting spot where you see the artificial contrivances, i.e. where we make games, starts to emerge. So in short, when we play, we learn. And there's all sorts of paths I could take to go down to talk about how it feels really good when we learn. This is why our ancestors reproduce. This is the why behind a lot of things. Our brain just drugs us, so we keep doing these things. And learning is one such thing. And eventually, these particular sort of primal instincts, these primal instances, drive more esoteric interests. And what happens is, in time, the things that you fancy, that you enjoy in a day-to-day experience, become much more abstract and removed from those underlying primal, visceral connections. But they're still driven by the same things. They're driven by things such as pattern recognition. It's often said that beauty itself exists in the intersection or the tension that arises between our expectation and what reality actually is, or at least what our brain should see fit to deliver to us as reality. And this sense of delight that we feel when we recognize a pattern, even just that little buzz, that little warm, squirmy feeling in your tummy, that permeates all sorts of things that motivate us through a variety of different situations, including games. There's also the sense of learning as insight. So insight isn't just like an aha moment where you're surprised by information. Insight is the process by which we take a variety of pieces of information, seemingly disconnected, and bring them all together under one umbrella and realize that there is, in fact, a connection between all of them and that they fit into the system that we're trying to model. Now what happens is when you see the same thing again in a similar context, you can draw on that information because you've started to map out the system. It's very motivating. It's clearly an evolutionary advantage. If you can do that, you can process information more efficiently. And it allows us to do things when we're thinking about contrived situations, like craft situations that give rise to insight as well. Our brains really crave new data. This drive to master these systems requires data, and that feeling of fitting something nicely into the system That's really what's driving us to seek out more data, so we continue to feel that. And there's a tension that exists there between the difficulty of being able to do that and the ease with which we do that, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. We don't necessarily crave, interestingly enough, new experiences. New experiences are themselves disruptive. They threaten the systems that you're trying to map. So while, again, it may feel good to figure out that subsequent system, in the interim, you sit in potentially a state of cognitive dissonance, which is very uncomfortable. And we get bored when there are no new patterns to absorb. So we're always chasing these opportunities to master new systems. We're always trying to live at that perfect tension between your unconscious skill level, it doesn't really matter if you're conscious of it or not, but between your unconscious skill level and the challenges that are presented to you in life. So how do we tie this back into games? Well, there's a lot of different inroads, and I sort of just picked one path through for today, but there's a lot of different ways from which I could present this. A lot of what I'm talking about today is fleshed out into a much, much more in-depth experience for the cognitive game design course that I'm teaching my grad students at the Center for Digital Media. So there's a little bit of picking and choosing and dropping things in here, and a lot of depth that's lacking. So games arise from the rules that govern play. So they're not the rules themselves, though, and this is a common misunderstanding. People will look at a game, like a board game, for example, and say that that is a game. But it's not really, right? It's a physical manifestation of rules governing play. And the tokens and the pieces and all of those different things, I mean, they're not necessary, right? They're cognitive aids. They deal with offloading some of that intense cognitive load. If you had to remember in your head the chessboard and where every piece was, it would be completely overwhelming. So we create tokens. We iconify things as a way of making that process easier and mitigating that tension, again, between the unconscious challenge and your skill level, or the unconscious skill level and your challenge. So games have always existed as a mechanism for learning, and that's kind of why I did the preamble about play leading up to this. And it's in the construction of these rule sets where we make games. And if we make really well-designed games, then we are tapping into these primal instincts and these senses of flow, etc., in very natural ways. Koster says, the best games teach everything the games, have to offer before the player stops playing. So you can look, in a sense, at a game as being an ideal, where it has knowledge to impart, and the player, the person interacting with this game, with this system, will do so and will only stop interacting with this system when the game has imparted all of the knowledge it has to impart. So you've drained it completely dry. You've sucked all of the juice out of the orange, and at that exact moment, you get bored. That's the perfect situation. That's not actually how it plays out. People get bored for all sorts of different reasons. There can be all sorts of distractions and mitigating factors, and you can be in the quote-unquote wrong headspace. There's all sorts of different things that muddy those waters. But ideally, that's what we're doing. And a lot of the work that I have done in games actually has been around this notion in education and computer science education specifically. So a well-designed game does three things. Kind of hand-wavy, but largely three things. It paces learning really well. So when you start out a new game, and I mean, this can be board games, this can be video games, this can be a game that you're playing outside, this can be a word game, this can be any number of situations, right? And a game is just rule-governed play. But it paces the learning, maintaining that comfortable spot with that tension. So it's not too easy, and it's not too difficult such that you're getting frustrated. It also mitigates cognitive load, because there's a very close relationship between, in that tension that exists between the elements that you have to hold within your head as the cognitive elements and those which are out before you in some sort of tokenization. And various games do this, again, with different degrees of success. And depending upon your motivation, there's a lot of factors. I mean, there's these primal ones that I'm talking about that I think make it clear that games themselves are a very fundamentally interesting discussion. But further to those, and on top of those, are all of the societal things that are driving us as well. You know, my friends are all playing Flappy Bird, so I'm going to play Flappy Bird. You know, my friend got 10 on Flappy Bird, so I'm going to get 11. There's all of these other things that motivate and compel us. And these are the things that we delve into when we deal with monetization and those feedback loops. So that's a whole other talk, but that's where that sits. But all of these things, all of these incentivization things, are what compel us to overcome certain hurdles. And if we're just naturally doing something by virtue of being humans who learn via play, et cetera, then there are sort of certain expectations of what that pace should be and what that cognitive load should be. And if you are particularly motivated to get involved in something, so I often find myself playing a lot of games because I want to talk about them, I want to see what's interesting, I want to see what's driving people. And oftentimes that means I have to swallow some pretty awful user interfaces and some not so good user experiences as well. And that might mean that there's a very high cognitive load. So I've been playing a game called Starbound, which is in early beta right now, available on Steam. Really interesting idea. It's sort of, it's a mix between a few different games, not the least of which, and perhaps most notably, is a Minecraft-esque feel in that you're mining and crafting and doing different things, and there's a multiplayer element to it. And the UI is just atrocious. I mean, I curse it every time I play. I now really enjoy the game. So I've gotten myself past the cognitive load. I was driven to do so because I wanted to understand how this system worked. So, you know, I griped all the way through it till eventually I managed to figure out how to do it. But it was very, very disturbing. Very, very disturbing. It drives me insane, actually. So it's just an example, though, of different motivating factors that will push us. A lot of folks will try to overgeneralize what it is that we're doing, failing to take into account that there are so many different factors that we have to work around when we're designing. That's why game design is so hard, so difficult. So the number one rule of game design is that just because you can play a game does not mean you can design it. And that's the hardest thing, as somebody who has made and published games, the hardest thing to deal with, because everybody that plays your game knows how to make it better. And sometimes they're absolutely right. Sometimes they have great ideas. But oftentimes, they don't know what's driving them. You know, it's the hindsight bias, it's the availability bias, it's all of those wonderful, amazing cognitive biases that make us feel pretty damn sure we know what's going on in our lives, when in fact we don't. And as a game designer, somebody wearing that hat, you have to be very mindful of these things. So with that in mind, how do you make a game? How does this all well and good, Kim. Yes, we're motivated by things and we're very primal and, you know, we'll dance around the fire and play games and it will be great. But how do you actually craft these meaningful experiences? Well, there's kind of two ways you can think about making a game. One is that you're setting up problems to solve, but to solve in the right way. Are there any people play golf here? A couple people? So there's a reason that we don't just, I mean, this is me playing golf. I pick up the ball and I go drop it in the hole. That seems pretty efficient. Why don't we just do that? Right? Why not? Well, there's all sorts of reasons why not. So we're setting up a system and we're trying to solve a problem in the right way. That is, we use a little stick and somehow magically balls go in the hole and it's great and we have a good time. It's not how it's played out for me, but I hear that's what's supposed to happen. But the other way to think about it is that you're constraining a possibility space. So of all the things that could happen, we're going to let it happen this way. So I could get to the back of the room by navigating the tables, or I could just climb over top of them, because that's more fun. You know, for whatever reason, that's more fun. And you can see that in sort of these two extremes. So if something is too sparse, if it's not sufficiently constrained, then we get into the very boring debate of, oh, it's not a game. And again, it's a whole other talk, but it's not a very interesting debate. It just sounds it on the surface. Versus if it's way, way, way too constrained, then you get into situations where you don't have agency, that sense in which you are the master of your domain and you are making choices that reflect your ability to enact meaningful change in an environment. So Paint, some people think of Paint, you know, MS Paint, as a game. You make games out of it. We've all made games out of things while trying to entertain ourselves. How did we do that? We constrain it. We apply rules. Versus the game Snake. You know that one where there's like the little line, beep, 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 eat little apples or dots or whatever, and as you do, your tail gets longer, you don't want to bump up. Very constrained system. Also a game. So then gameplay comes out of this, right? It's the emergent, holistic experience of playing a game. But what it really reduces to, and this is where we get slightly more practical, is a set of core mechanics. So a mechanic is how the player brings about changes in the state of the game. So the state is all of the things that are true about a game at any given moment. Right? This room, for example, is in a state. We could make a table stacking game, and it would reflect the state currently, and my mechanic, for example, could be hoisting tables up on top of other tables. I am changing the state of this room. And fundamentally, that's really all games are from the kind of construction perspective. And when you collect them all together, you get, surprise, a system. Right? This is where the system actually lives from the practical implementational standpoint. And the game, from the player's perspective, lives here because they have to discover the system. And we're really just leveraging those cause and effect models that our brains want to build anyway. And depending upon the kind of experience that you want to engineer, you can exercise different degrees of control. If you have very loose control, then your games tend to be much more emergent. You know, a lot of kids' playground games are far more emergent. Tighter control, you get games like Dwarf Fortress and things where the environment, what you're able to do in the environment is very strictly governed by rules. It's not to say that these games can't be very rich, dynamic, interesting games because you inject a lot of rules, but it's going to be a very specific kind of experience. And you can kind of sum this up thusly. So your rules give rise to the dynamics. So you could talk about a game where I run and jump and I shoot, right? That describes most games on the market these days, sometimes it feels. It's not actually true, I don't believe that, but that means a thing, right? Or you can talk about, oh man, I was just cresting over this hill and suddenly Billy came down with guns a-blazing and it was, oh, it was crazy. That's the dynamics. That wasn't in the first part that I said, but it was given rise to by the interplay between those mechanics. And then this fun, again, crack out the scare quotes, because fun is such a poorly defined term and a moving target, it's not really actually interesting. But the aesthetics and the user experience lives here. And if you like it, then you come back and you play more. So fun, if you like, is about feeling good, and it comes about as a result of mastery of systems, comprehension, right, the insight, those moments of delight, solving puzzles. This is the drug stuff that I'm talking about. So just for this last bit, I want to talk a little bit about what it means to enjoy a game, so to speak, what it means to have a successful design. So you can talk about emotion as being a component of this, and there's all sorts of interesting things, deriving from the two-factor theory of emotion, whether or not you subscribe to that or not. There's some work around that in games that's actually kind of interesting. But at the very least, emotions play a huge role. If you were standing right there with your toes hanging off, you would feel a thing, right? If not, there's probably something slightly off. But let's assume, like most people, you would feel a thing, right? Or you could stand on your friend's patio, summer day, birds are singing, light breeze, and you're hanging your toes off. You're going to feel another thing. In both of those situations, you didn't die. Right? So no thing actually happened, the thing that you were thinking about in the case of standing on the edge of the cliff. You survived. But that expectation of what might happen, that fear of what might happen, that's a pretty compelling feeling. That's a very powerful thing. And if you can harness that in a game, you can get some really, really powerful experiences. So I've kind of been dancing around a little bit of this notion of flow. There's a really good book called Flow by Mikhail, and then the rest of the alphabet, I think, follows in his last name, so I won't even try to pronounce it. But anyway, the book's called Flow. It's really easy to find. Flow is that state that you enter into. It's a state of concentration where one event melts into the next. It's when you totally escape. It's the perfect balance. I was talking about that tension between skill and challenge. It's that perfect balance. And when that is well mitigated, you enter into this blissful state. It arises in all sorts of situations in everyday life. You know, they talk about the runner's high, and there's variants of flow all over the place. Related, but not the same thing, is this idea of immersion. So immersion is a little bit different. Flow is occupying the brain. It's like keeping things going, well-oiled, as it were. Immersion, though, adds a little bit more. You have to enter into a state of flow to potentially be immersed, but it is itself not immersion. So this is really what immersion looks like. You kind of remove the real world by entering into that state of flow. Things are melting away. You increase the arousal level. Lots of different ways we can do that. In games, for example, we can crank up the creepy music. We can just make something fast-paced. We can do all sorts of different things. We can introduce a love interest. We can put you on the edge of a cliff. Right? So many different ways we can get you aroused. And then we label it somehow. We maybe don't explicitly label it. We label it in the crafting of the world. But we label it. This is an immersive experience. It is not the same also as presence. So Minsky defined presence as that notion of being there. Like I'm present in this room. I'm actually present in this room, right? And I feel very present in this room. But presence gets interesting when you think about things like virtual reality, right? Or operating like telemedicine with telerobotics, you know, things where you're operating remotely. What is presence then? Well, immersion and presence aren't the same thing. So this is looking through the Oculus Rift demo world in some Spanish villa or something. I forget where it is. But anyhow, has anyone here tried the Rift? One person, a couple people. OK. So it's really interesting. And as a kid in the 80s, VR was like life-defining. That was what I was waiting for. My whole life was VR. And this was it. Like I climbed in here, was like, oh my God, it's here. Lawnmower Man, we're finally... And it's, Lawnmower Man I think was a 90s thing, but VR was kind of the crowning glory of where we were going with a lot of digital experiences. But it's not presence. You put it on, and you might feel kind of like you were there, but you're not necessarily going to enter into a state of flow. So you're presented one of these in each eye. You can look around, it responds to that motion, and it's reactive in that sense. But it's low resolution, it's got drag, the frame rate's ridiculously low. You're not present. You're just sort of kind of there. And you're certainly not in any state of flow because anything could be, you know, I was in it having conversations with people. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm looking at that, I'm looking at that. But I knew I was like right here in this room. Contrast that though, I did the Valve VR demo a couple weeks ago down at the Steam Dev Days. This is the Atari 2600 of virtual reality. Valve's is the PlayStation 6 of virtual reality. I'm probably not even exaggerating enough. That's how striking the difference is. I was in there for 40 minutes, no fatigue, no nausea, nothing. In fact, I came home ready to move my office into virtual reality. It was that good. I would live the rest of my life there. It was phenomenal. And there, it was just a series of tech demos. There they presented me with all sorts of interesting, compelling, and challenging environments. I'll tell you very briefly about a couple of them. The first, you're basically standing in a giant cube. It extends down below you and up above. And just to drive home the fact that you're not anywhere real, they plastered the walls with 1999 Yahoo Finance web pages. So you knew you weren't anywhere real. So you're looking around, like, okay, that's kind of funny. And then they get a little ball moving around. You're kind of like, ooh. You've got no extension of self, so arms you can't see. But there is an outward-facing camera, and you stand in a little living room with QR codes, and it tracks you as you move around. Additionally, there's about a gap about that big where you can look down, and you were standing on a bright red little IKEA rug. You can imagine your standard IKEA rug. So you could track the fact that you were in the room. But I barely could because it was so immersive. I immediately was just there and present, and gradually what they did is they ramped up the tech demos as they increased the flow as well. So it did fully become immersive. But to start with, it was certainly present. And here's some pretty compelling evidence. Standing in this cube, they then put me on like a Minecraft-style cube. Like, okay, I'm standing on the thing now. Mildly interesting, but I'm still looking around. There's a guy in the corner who's my handler, making sure I don't walk into walls and doing crazy things and switching over the demos. And he says, feel free to walk around. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, oh my God. Kim, you're standing in the living room. It's fine. Just okay, this is embarrassing. Say it. I'm good. He said, don't feel bad. Nobody can step off that edge. So my brain was like, we're here. I'm all in. So finally I cheated and I kind of went, looked around. Oh, my brain's like, solid, we're good here. Relax, stand down, we're fine. But it was so interesting and so deeply compelling to me that I could not do it. I physically, my legs were shaking. I was having all of the physiological responses appropriate to about to step off a cliff. It's amazing. So they did that. They did a few other things. One of the other interesting ones was you could stick your head inside a model and see the clockwork and how it was working. So there were all sorts of amazing little, or not little rather, but implications of where this technology could go. So that was presence. I was there. And as they took me through more environments that got more and more involved, the world started to disappear and I was there. I was becoming fully immersed. To the point where when they spoke to me at one point, I was startled because the voice came out of nowhere in this world. Wearing this, I knew the person was beside me and I never lost sight of that. So very, very different, very, very interesting. So I'll leave you guys with one sort of contentious thought, and I'll give you something from each side of the contention just for fun. So the question then is, are books immersive? So think about it for a moment. So here's one side of the argument. No, they're not. They don't give you something that we call extra noetic habitation. Right? You don't leave your head. It's all in here. It's all in your head. So there's no reaction to you as a person. Everything's just being constructed in here. So there's this sense in which immersion involves player involvement. You have to be interacting with the environment and doing things. Books are only in your head. Or yes. So what about ergodic literature? In ergodic literature, or ergodism, it's a non-trivial task to make sense of this world, right? You're constructing a world. You have to traverse the text and not just read the words, but from those words give rise to a world, and a world in which you can lose yourself. You can start to establish that sense of flow. I mean, hopefully everybody in this room has had the pleasure of being lost in a book. That's certainly flow. And if you can argue that a book can also likewise arouse you and give you a reason for those feelings to exist, then it too is immersive. So with that thought then, the game, non-game, not interesting debate that I referred to earlier is arguably sitting around this notion of ergodism. And ergodic literature, ergodic experiences, any ergodic interactive experience, that tension that I referred to earlier, that pacing of skill relative to the challenge being presented and being able to navigate that's where this lives. So you have to be doing a thing, you have to be interacting with a thing. And as a consequence, in designing games, well, challenging and difficult and amazing, fascinating opportunity to really kind of push at what it is that we do and how we experience things. They give us so much more. There's so much more play room in designing a game because of those interactions, because of that player involvement. And I think that where we sit today, we are still in large part missing out on many, many opportunities to push the bounds of what it is that we are capable of in interactive fiction. And that I think that the big reason I mentioned the virtual reality one is not because I think all games should be virtual reality, and I think actually the last thing that we should do is shoehorn in first-person shooters and whatnot into those just because it seems like the natural step. I think it's not. I think the next step is a nuke and pave, where we remove all of what we have done before and we start from the ground up. And that's really where I'm interested in, is that area of user experience, user interaction as well, but growing out of that, the broader field of user experience and how we engineer those experiences and what that looks like and what is the language of presence and what is the language of immersion. Because it's not what we have been doing for the last 30 years in games or interactive experiences. It is very different. Walking out of that demo in Valve made me realize that we are there. I thought we were 20 years out of being there, but we are there. And we're in the typical problem of now we're here, oh crap, what do we do? Well, we just apply what we've always done. But that's going to be a mistake. So what do we do when we actually are in these environments? How do we interact? It's not going to be Hollywood telling us what to do. We don't do this. This is exhausting and not fun. It's fine for the short moment it's on the Hollywood film, but it's not realistic. And we certainly don't use mice or keyboards or even controllers. What do we do in these interactive experiences to maximize that? So that's basically it. That's kind of a really, really big nutshell and a very, very kind of way up in space overview of the kinds of problems that I'm interested in and that I look at, and hopefully a little bit of a flavor of why this matters, where this stems from sort of a more fundamental, visceral look at play, through to what it means to actually craft a game, through to where it is that we can go in terms of crafting these experiences and what is next. So that's it. It's not really bye. You can ask me questions if you want, but.
So anyone have questions?
I'd like to explore kind of an affective dimension of play. Gilbert Ryle, in the concept of mind, described playing golf as as something that really didn't involve a lot of pleasure. Not in the feeling sense. So yeah, he's known as a behaviorist, but he was kind of a deep behaviorist.
That's a great characterization.
Well, there's another word for it, but it's not coming to mind. It's a kind of behaviorist. But anyway, so basically emphasized the idea that we're not really interrupted by feelings of any sort. We're just fully immersed in the game that we enjoy. So I just want to explore the importance of pleasure, because the concept of pleasure, it really shows up a lot in psychology. I'm kind of amazed at how it's still with us as this underlying idea. It's almost hedonism that we're looking for. Daniel Dennett just wrote a book on humor. If you look at it, it really emphasizes pleasure. Like basically, we, in that view, we are basically driven to make predictions because we find disconfirmation of these predictions to be pleasurable, right? So there's this hedonism that's underneath there. So basically what I want to explore with you is really how important is the pleasure? And maybe was Ryle not maybe right? And if so, what does that mean for your...
Yeah, so I think that's a fantastic question, and one that I've thought about at length. And it is a much more fleshed out explanation for why I put fun in quotes. Because I think that it is not necessarily a meaningful distinction. So in my class, I semi-ban my students from talking about the game versus game debate. I said they can buy me a beer and I'll talk at length about that, but we're not going to talk about it in the class. And they're not allowed to describe games as fun, because it's not an interesting, it's so colloquial. I had fun, and that's a societal construct that we can accept that, okay, this is a good thing and I should pursue this. But when you actually drill down and take a look at what is fun, it just sort of like goes away. So it's more like a backward justification, hindsight bias kind of look at why we think that we would do this thing again. And so it's a kind of a colloquial label for motivating experiences.
Okay, so let's say we take that. Now let's look at the guy whose name I can't pronounce either, this concept of flow.
Right.
So I think he would kind of agree in a sense with Ryle. You can say that he took Ryle's idea in a sense. And when you're in flow, you're not disrupted by these feelings, right? Yet, if you read what this guy says, he says that we're driven to repeat that experience. So it's coming up again. It's like it's kind of a weird hedonism. It's a hedonism without pleasure, but we're still seeking that state. So actually what I'm getting at is I would challenge that. And I'd say that if we're to model ourselves as we seek things that we quote unquote enjoy, we're not really seeking to reproduce a mental state.
Right.
We're probably driven in another well, let's just leave it open. The architecture of the mind is driven to do certain things that happens to lead to those states.
Yeah.
But those states are not pulling us towards them.
Yeah, I agree. I think we largely exist in a perpetual state of bias towards fitting everything into our perception of reality, when in fact a lot of the motivations and whatnot sit at a sub or fully unconscious level. But we want to reify things, right? We want to be able to point to explanations. We want to be able to tokenize things such that we can share them through words, for example, or other iconography. And so in doing so, we're shunted back into that bias of, well, it must exist, it must be this thing, we're seeking out this particular conscious mental state. But I don't think that that's actually the case. I don't think I don't know if I want to say something so broadly sweeping as to say that it doesn't exist, but it's not the clean-cut thing that it's typically referred to as. I think it is a much more complex artifact of the system, if you will.
Yeah, I was wondering how relevant do you think quantifying and measuring is immersion and presence, and then connected to that, do you have any idea how you would distinguish immersion and presence if you were to measure it?
Right. I mean, I think that anytime you measure, you run into the problem of discretization, right? So at some point you're sort of saying this is and this isn't, and I guess the question is how interesting is that boundary? If it's not that interesting, then we can sort of arbitrarily set it somewhere and talk about the extremes and get some interesting stuff out of those two extremes, and then recognize as we draw closer to that threshold that we may be losing any, the utility of our findings at that point. So I think that there can be made a distinction of whether or not somebody is or is not immersed. I think that is arguably a binary state. And I'm open to exploring whether or not that actually is the case. But that's sort of right now, I think that's the case.
But I mean, you gave us an example of the Oculus Rift, and we can think about just, I don't know, having a game on my mobile phone or an Oculus Rift, and then Valve demo. So this is the spectrum, right? That's be a continuum.
Right.
So the question would be, how do you have an idea? Because I mean, people have been trying to measure presence for quite a while, and so I was just wondering if you had any ideas, because you make that distinction between presence and immersion, and actually, so far, actually, the word presence was more used in the sense that you use immersion with the people I've been talking to. So I was just curious if you see a way of teasing these apart.
Yes.
Even if it's just an item in a questionnaire, says, did you or did you not? And then you say, okay, because that person said this or that, it must be one or the other.
So I think it's really interesting. So I think you can look at measuring both immersion and presence somewhat separately. Presence, I think, being the muddiest of the two, is very tricky to measure. It's that I would look at that as along a spectrum of extension of self. So if you feel fully extended into a space, then you're arguably present. And where that boundary sits, I don't know how present you need to be to feel present, to say so loosely. Whereas immersion, I think that it's a little more dichotomous. You're either in it or you're not in it. And while the Oculus Rift, for example, it could give rise to an immersive experience, but it's not inherently immersive. So that's a big part of the distinction that I want to make, is just because you're looking around and you might arguably feel present, you're not necessarily going to feel immersed. You could still be. So for parts of that Valve demo, I was certainly present, but I was not immersed because of having a conversation with the guy that I knew existed in another world over there. But I still was somehow mitigating that cognitive dissonance between I was existing in two spaces at once, because I couldn't walk off that edge, so I was there. So there's I think separating those two, whether or not the term's morph or whatnot, but separating those two experiences is important. And then looking at the interplay between what does presence bring to immersion, does immersion bring anything to presence? Not necessarily, because I can get immersed in a Tetris game, and while yes, there's a space that I'm in some capacity, whether, what does present mean in that sense?
That does not mean that you are feeling that you're experiencing flow while you play Tetris, as opposed to being immersed. I mean, isn't in your definition flow plus presence equals immersion?
No, it's flow plus arousal plus some sort of cognitive infrastructure around that to account for that level of arousal. Presence doesn't need to be in there necessarily. So there's interesting debates on that, actually. That's a whole huge realm of literature as to where presence fits in that definition, which I think is really, really interesting. And I think that's probably the meat of what you're getting at. But it's a huge conversation. But I totally agree. There's work to be done there, and it's not a fully delineated space. I think there's some really hard questions to be answered there. But I would certainly separate those two, and I would say that flow is definitely a component of immersion. Presence is maybe a component, but you can certainly have presence without immersion, and perhaps you can have immersion without any sense of presence, unless you broaden the definition to include some other more abstract ideas.
So it's interesting that a lot of this is really focused on sort of presence and immersion. I mean, because anybody here who's my age or older is sort of mystified by the modern world, where everybody is like here right now. Like whereas, and this is as rich an experience as you can possibly provide, right? It's absolutely real life, and yet, like, you know, when you like walk around, everybody has chosen some 4-inch screen to be their entire world. It's, you know, it provides no sense of smell or no, you know, it's like the lowest bandwidth experience you can imagine.
Right.
And that's better than the richness of real life. And so I really wonder whether richness is worth, you know, that rich feeling of presence, is really worth anything at all. I mean, because, you know, even the dumb Tetris game, which, you know, is totally much better than all of the richness of real life.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really. I mean, I'm looking at 40, so I can certainly appreciate that. I don't. It's irritating to me to have to do certain things on my phone and have my life compressed into that whatever that might be. I think that there's a lot of interesting things at work there in terms of, from a gaming perspective, there's this idea that games provide these very narrowly focused way to poke at pleasure centers, and so there's these feedback loops, these compulsions that form around that. So I think there's that, which can often cloud whether or not we would rather be present. Because, you know, you look at, I mean, who here does Skype meetings, right? There's nothing more irritating than a Skype meeting. I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, Skype meetings, Hangouts, they all irritate me because none of them are to the level of resolution that I want. And so all of the societal expectations I have for interfacing with others just all like blow up. You know, I don't like it. I'm used to it, I do it, but I think it's fundamentally broken. So there's a sense where presence is wholly lacking. I do not feel, even though I'm looking at a screen at your office, I do not feel in any sense that I am there with you. I feel like it is broken and I'm forced to kind of talk through this, it's the idea of transparent interfaces, which mediate that, right? So there's no transparency that exists there. It's in some sense very, very opaque. So if you're looking at distilled experiences that drive compulsion loops, sometimes they overpower that. But if you can get, I think the ideal thing that we're looking at is compelling experiences that are present would be sort of the holy grail of experiences.
It just seems like if you were going to weigh those two, presence is worth almost nothing. I mean, I literally saw a guy riding a motorcycle, one-handed, down the road with his phone. Like, I'm like, you know, that's when the real world and your actual life means nothing compared to a tiny little glowing.
Can I comment on that? I mean, I think that points us to the fact
Do you ride a motorcycle? I'm sorry.
I do ride.
It was actually Ulysses. He's just defending himself now.
But I think it points to the fact that there's context matters, right? And Robinson Crusoe, which I bet not sitting on the island doing anything on his mobile phone.
Yeah.
Because there's no social context. I mean, these people, I think they're very present. It's just something that is a construct in their head. I mean, they're communicating with their friends, they're updating their profile. All of that, without that social network existing, would not be motivated to do it. Yeah. So I agree. On the one hand, if we just look at that time slice, it seems like that. But if we look at the bigger context, they're extremely networked. They're extremely actually acting in the real world, but through a very limited device.
Yeah, I guess my point is like the real world matters, you know, very little more than when you're like riding a motorcycle and can be killed at any moment.
Right.
Right. Like, and yet the social context is way more powerful than the real world.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm suggesting is like, if we could just literally sit in a little box and never move around at all, but got tons of wonderful social things and got to play games and stuff. Like, I wonder how many people would choose an impoverished virtual life that was very rich in social other things.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of science fiction writers love to explore that space. But I think what's interesting about all of this is that whatever that is, and you can, there's habituation and all of these different things that dude's going down on the motorcycle in the same way that we can drive around. I have no idea how I drove here today other than I nearly died in the snow, but I haven't been at SFU in a while. I'd forgotten what it's like. But there's that sense in which that all melts into the background, and so those social needs bubble up and are able to be given more prominence, I think, in any given situation. And if you were to wholly exist in isolation, physical presence isolation, loosely constructed, then I don't know how long that would hold. And if that, I guess we probably can't do it because we would never get ethics approval. But it'd be a really interesting experiment rather, to raise children in boxes. I don't have kids, can you tell? Raise children in boxes and present them the world that way versus taking a child that's grown up in this environment and dropping them into such a world versus what we have here. And just that expectation with respect to how much reality needs to be present. Maybe it's a throwback too to just this idea that our brain really is just presenting us a reality, right? I mean, it's just the distillation of not even distillation is the wrong word, but it's whatever the brain, loosely speaking, sees fit to throw at us at any one given moment. And I think that abstraction that always exists is really, really interesting in terms of speaking to why it is we are compelled by certain situations and we get caught up in certain situations, is because our brain is at any point filtering out and masking and presenting things in a certain way. So something about that situation is crossing the threshold for what we need out of any given experience. It's horribly loosely constructed, but roughly what I'm kind of the distinction that I'm thinking of.
Okay, I think we want to thank, I'm just watching the time, I want to thank Kimberly for a great talk. The other thing I'd like to mention is that she is, and we have a meeting later today to kind of go over this, she is, for the SFU people in the room, part of SFU, UBC, Emily Carr, and BCIT.
Get around.
So the Center for Digital Media is connected to us, and we're trying to create better ties. So if there's things that you heard that you were very excited about, Great Northern Way is here, and there's ties going back and forth. The best ties besides those are ones where you get to eat pizza at the same time. So she, as well as all our speakers, will be available in her home turf at CDM. So it's good to see what it's like at the Center for Digital Media on March 27th. And it's going to be super fun as soon as we figure it all out.
It's going to be great, trust us.
Please come to that. So again, she is local, so please continue to have a conversation with her. But thank you again.
Thank you.